Hi, folks. We'll kick off. I'm really quite enjoying this poll. As I said last class, I'm not using headphones, but I am using a serious mic. It's unidirectional. It seems not to be giving feedback, um, like a whistling, annoying sound. If you do have any sound problems, classic feedback, like some, Oyaji at an event stands with the mic right in front of the speakers and everyone's ears get blasted. If you're getting that kind of sound, let me know, because I do have headphones I can use. My preferences are not to. Okay. And Shuka, you just sent me nice message, spot on, and I was going to reply to you in Moodle about this. So first of all, that's a nice prompt. I've got a note to myself here too. Welcome to everybody who's just joined the class with the third registration. And because, of course, we've been doing it virtually, those of you who weren't signed up didn't get the notifications on the login details. Although a couple of you wrote to me privately and I sent it to you directly. Thank you for your interest. I'm going to put up the videos for the last two classes. Indeed, I said I was going to do that over the weekend, but and not a pitch for sympathy, but I was a bit ill over the weekend, so I didn't come into the office. Not corona, just not sleeping very much the last week or two. Partly semester preps, much bigger issues back in Australia with my I'll be blunt, my mum being in hospital and trying to remotely make arrangements and various things. And it turns out completely useless at a distance. But yeah, so some things going on there. And yes, I didn't sleep much and it all kind of caught up with me on the weekend. I will probably not put the videos up tonight. Instead, I'll do that at the end of the week. I've got a couple of classes tomorrow to run. Maybe tomorrow night. I'll see how I go with the editing and everything. I have to clean them up, and I'll put them all up so you will be able to see with a bit of a lag videos of all the live sessions. For those of you just joining, I've explained when we do breakout classes, and we will from time to time, I do edit out the student component of that. So the videos will go up, but you won't be in them. So don't worry about that. It's just me. Another very significant thing, I've just messaged everyone so that people can see it in writing too. One student kindly messaged me on Monday night, I think, Monday night, and said that it had some frustrations trying to get a hard copy of the text. Several bookstores were sold out and they said it was on order. I had previously checked with Kinokuniya and Maruzen, but they had some, but they're obviously gone. Some of you got them. The most disconcerting thing was that Seikyo was saying the same thing. So yeah, this was Monday. So Monday morning, I interacted with the co-op, Seikyo, and the nice person I interacted with offered the most profound apologies to myself and to all of you. Also to my Zemise, but the Zemise already know about this, because they managed to completely forget both of my book orders. I'd be curious actually to hear if anyone wants to put in the chat whether this has, oh dear, and now my camera's dropped out again. Nothing's going right today. So I'd be curious to hear if people are having problems with the textbooks in other courses too. But the Seikyo person I dealt with was quite honest in saying that there was a bit of a mess up, screw up, whatever description you want to use. And the book orders were only made in September, sometime in September. I don't know if it's the beginning of September or the end of September. The net effect is that things that are coming from the United States taking quite a while. particularly because co-op goes through resellers in Japan. They typically go through Maruzen or Kinokuniya. You then have to submit the orders to either separate distributors in Japan or directly to the publishers. Um, However, the person did tell me on Monday that they currently had 13 copies available for sale. And my understanding, it was a bit aimai the way it's written, but my understanding is that they actually can be sent to you too. So that's an option. However, as I've been saying from the beginning of the course, the easiest way to get hold of the text instantly is to get the Kindle version. Now you can either go through Japan Amazon store, or you can go, if you've got an account directly, amazon.com in the US or the UK or whatever. I go through the US. There's always debate amongst colleagues here about which is a little bit cheaper, the UK store or the US store, whatever. Um, I always look between Amazon Japan and Amazon US. Generally, direct from the US is cheaper, not always for physical books because of the shipping component. And there are some disruptions now as well too. There are just far fewer aeroplanes flying between America and Australia, of course. Japan. No planes flying with Australia. It's another story. A few. Zennik is one of the few. So anyway, deliveries are taking longer. Anyway, the Amazon option, very straightforward. You get the digital version immediately. And if you don't already use Kindle, it's not tied to a Kindle device. You can do that. I owned one Kindle about 10 years ago. Ever since, I've been reading the many, many books that I buy via Amazon, reading them on an iPad. And you can also use the iOS app for Kindle, even on a phone. It helps if it's a bigger phone, but you can read Kindle books to directly through browser reader and OS as well. So you've got plenty of options. I do recommend quite seriously the Kindle option in general for getting books, partly because you can travel just so much more lightly and carry a lot of reading material. But also the other thing is sometimes they do very substantial discounts to really drive the traffic, because of course the marginal cost of a book sold through Kindle is kind of nothing to them. So you'll often find, as I just bought one last night, 50% discount on the Kindle version versus the print version. Every now and again, there are some really crazy pricing with Amazon, though. So sometimes for some books that large numbers of people want instantly, it's really trending, they charge full price. And sometimes the paper copy, even sent all the way from America, actually works out cheaper, which is a bit weird. But for the most part, it's quite a lot cheaper. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, fundamental point. Yep. The co-op bookstore closed till 10th of the 11th, closed till the 11th. Yeah. Sorry. When I say available from co-op, duh, stupid me, they have the online sales. So come in the site. I don't have the link there. So yeah, thank you, Lisa. Okay, that is I'm having what my mum calls a seniors moment. Okay, that's just so kind of elementary. But so you can get physical copy, and they've got 13 of them in stock, ready to be called, to ordered. And the person I dealt with said the no, if it's no shihan, so regular sales, and they were told that they could get an extra stock quite quickly if those 13 were sold out. This complex layer of resellers. Okay, so very importantly, because of the difficulties that some people have had in actually getting a copy of the book, some people might prefer to wait for a hard copy if you're attached to paper, all of those things. And just simply because I re-looked this morning at the market system article, I'm about to show you again and would like people to have a go at reading. relating to today. I've decided to, contrary to what I gave you on the schedule, which is on Moodle, there will be no questions about the introduction and chapter 1 on the first quiz, which will be in Wednesday next week when we don't have a live class. Okay, it's just 15 multiple choice questions. Don't get freaked out by them. Fairly straightforward. Bang, bang, bang. You should be able to get through it in about 15 minutes or so. I generally plan on a question a minute, you know. And then there'll be some on-demand video material, some that I'm making myself, and some other video material in addition to stuff that's already on the website. A few other things that I will be more contemporary kind of media reports and things like that, and a documentary thing that I'll be putting some links to, which will all add up roughly equivalent, including your quiz taking time, or minimite, to a full class equivalent. The logic, by the way, of the quizzes, they are part rear view mirror, looking at what we've covered already at the point of the quiz. So I think 2/3 looking backwards and 1/3 looking forwards. If you look at the schedule, you'll realize the reason why, although it's still fairly early in the semester, I originally had the introduction and chapter 1 as stuff to cover for the quiz, was that the day after the live session next Thursday, we'll be talking about the firm in the firm as institution, the firm in law, the firm in culture, the firm in history. So I thought it'd be better for people to have that live session having already read the relevant chapter of the book. But that's not necessary. So yeah, you can listen to me and then you can read it subsequently. So there's no problem in moving that to a subsequent week. I'll try not to do that. I don't want to have this a knock-on effect to multiple weeks though, because I do think, and a huge amount of research shows, that lectures are actually more meaningful if you've had some familiarity with the issues in advance. Otherwise, so much goes over your head. Then you do the relevant reading, Googling, or whatever you have to do to get on top of it, and then go back to the PowerPoint slides and they start to make sense. So what that means is that many things I would have said in the live session that connect the basic things in the slides to examples, for example, that's lost unless you go and then rewatch the video of the live session. So, which is time consuming. You've got so many other things to do. Right. One other thing is I am, in a few days, I think, not quite sure the timing, going to send everyone just a little survey, which is more really simple. It'll be a Google Docs thing, which is really just about trying to get some sense, for me, more out of curiosity than anything else, to be perfectly honest, hopefully empathetic curiosity, just to get a sense of where people are in terms of their programs. And in particular, I want to get a sense of how many of you were expecting to be in somewhere other than Waseda this semester. So the really, really sad cases out there, all of you who just had your study abroad plan smashed. Okay, so I want to know about that. And I want to know how many of you are also kind of struggling, juggling shukatsu, early stages of shukatsu, or kind of last minute shukatsu, for example, those of you who will be graduating at the end of this semester, or those of you who are still a number of semesters away. And this really is, to be perfectly blunt, an opportunity to put your case to me up front. Unfortunately, every semester what happens is some people are less engaged with the course for whatever reasons, sometimes very good reasons, sometimes very poor reasons. I was actually shooting a little bit of video on Friday night around Shinjuku, wearing a mask, ventured into Kabukicho, and saw a couple of SIL students I knew, very happy, shall I say. So it's good to have happy times. Keep your masks on, please, especially in a festering place like Kabukicho. 本当にアホが集まってるから、ぜひマスクしてね、歌舞伎町行けば。 So if you're there every night and your plans don't work out so well, and then you write to me after the final assessment is all done and saying, "Dear Poka-chan, kind of like going to Catholic confession, you know, I have sinned, but please forgive me." Or sorry, okay, I much prefer to know all the kind of constraints that people have in advance. And I really mean this in an empathetic kind of way. One of the problems, in a sense, with Waseda is that it's such a big university, highly kind of functionally specialized. And when we talk about the nature of the modern organization, the large scale enterprise, I'll actually reference the university because I think in some ways that'll be more meaningful to you because you've directly experienced it rather than working for a large company. But we get effects such as what we call silo effects. Different parts of the organization do their thing and they often do it quite well, but they don't connect with each other. One of the big things these days is matrix management, and that is rather than just the vertical hierarchies, to try and have horizontal lines of communication. So to be perfectly blunt, many of you will have dealt with the Dugok Center about the, say, for example, suspended study abroad or, experience abroad, coming back and whatnot. Some information goes to SILS, the Jimishal, and to the Schkorber, the executive. Remarkably little information comes actually to the regular academic faculty members. So, for example, if you're one of those poor folks who, for example, had to leave Milan in March and come back, your professors won't know that, okay? But I think they should know that. So this little survey will really be about finding out where people are, not just in terms of credit, but where you're going in general. But also I'm going to use this opportunity to add a couple of questions to find out the kind of industries that you're interested in. Where are you hoping to go work-wise? Because I'm in the middle of kind of remaking this course, in terms of pulling it apart to its core bits. It's almost down to its like molecular level, okay, to do lots of short video. And this gives me an opportunity to work in upon a bunch of really interesting little case studies. And if I'm going to be picking case studies, I'd rather pick case studies that I know relate to industries that appeal to yourselves, because what might wow me may be pretty uninteresting to yourselves. So that's the other reason why we do that. So although it won't be a compulsory survey, I really encourage people to engage. Okay, now let's end the poll. I see that 68 out of 70 have done this, okay. And I'll share the results straight away. This is quite amusing. Let me screenshot it. I think, yeah, this is a fun one. Oh, my camera's frozen. Hopefully it'll come back again. Oh, I'm a little black whirl. Okay, we'll have a look at the poll results while I screenshot this. And if need be, I'll go over to my built-in camera, but it's really horrible. Yeah, let's... yeah, I'll use this lousy camera. Maybe that's a good excuse for buying a brand new iPhone when they come out in a week or two. Let me just post the quiz results. Okay. First of all, maybe this is a case of like cookie or middle. Okay, markets. People don't seem to be put off by markets. That's good, because in some countries, particularly Anglo-American world, and I would say particularly in the UK and Australia now, markets, the words themselves have actually become a little bit kind of stigmatized in certain ways, and particularly when we talk about marketization. Significant minority of people think that that's all a conspiracy just to make wealthy people wealthier at the expense of others. Which is a promising thing. Privatization, about 1 in 8 of you thought that that on balance sounds negative, and We'll have a look at issues of privatization popping up in a number of contexts. One of the really important, I think important points about privatization is there's no single agreed model of good privatization. No, there are agreed models of good privatization. There are lots of models of privatization that actually happen. And very often they're actually bad. They're bad for political reasons. That in fact, what's happening is that governments are selling assets which are owned by the nation as a whole to their mates cheaply. Okay. So they take public assets and they turn them into private assets, and then the public at large have to pay to use these things that the public used to own. So when the politics is bad, particularly already influential business people control the state through supporting governments and whatnot, then the consequences of privatization can be bad. We can see many circumstances where, on the other hand, privatization works very well. And it's often a combination of market discipline, competition, together with privatization become important. Deregulation, yep, again, is it bad regulations you're getting rid of, or good regulations? If they're regulations that actually stop business being immoral, unethical, then deregulation is bad. So it's the question of what regulation. And even, I think probably my position is actually a bit more qualified than the opinion poll here suggests. But I think in the Japanese context, so kisei kanma toka, deregulation, I think people understand it as being associated with fixing a lot of old rules which aren't good for consumers and have benefited some businesses, at the expense of most people. So the hibiki, nihon no ba no hibiki, and how it sounds is actually not bad. Neoliberalism, interesting. Okay, maybe I primed that by having a qualified statement earlier. Globalization, interesting, good, okay. Because you guys can very much be the winners of globalization, but we need to be alert to the political backlash as well. Capitalism, okay. Selling drugs to children. Okay, the 15% of you who thought that wasn't negative, I hope you use drugs in the broad sense of medicines to cure illness. If you meant mayaku, please stay away from the area around where my 9-year-old goes to school. Okay, we might have some dodgy characters here. Okay, yeah, but the old question: what drugs? Okay, and slavery. Let's assume the one person who didn't think slavery was negative didn't look down to the bottom of the quiz before they answered. Okay, right. Yeah. Okay. Although I did have a friend, rather badly behaved friend, who had this really bizarre pickup line, which seemed to work extraordinarily well. There was an old cool Brian Ferry song called "Slave to Love," and he used to say, "I want to be a slave to love for you," and that used to work for him, which always amazed me. Okay, yeah. Maybe the song reference kind of worked. I wouldn't suggest saying make me your slave. That's a little bit S&M. That's a bit weird. Okay, we don't want to do that. User pays 12%. This is interesting. In some countries, user pays, you'll get 50-60% of people saying no, completely outrageous, because it's often been a way for governments to kind of raise taxes without saying they're raising taxes. And to give a perspective on this, Australia has done a lot of this. My Australian and Japanese driver's licenses are on the same kind of renewal cycle. So I renew my Japanese driver's license around the same time as my Australian one, around my birthday. The Japanese license renewal, I think, cost me something like 3,000 yen or something. The Australian one cost me $100 and something, which is outrageously expensive. And this is the state of Queensland where it was issued. And they even have a scale of fees where if you renew it for 5 years, it works out cheaper. It's like a long-term subscription to so many things. But if you renew it for just 1 year, it's even more expensive. So it's a rip-off to start with. And then the poorer people who can't afford to pay 5 years at once have to pay so much more to renew them annually. So they're the kind of things that make me absolutely furious, because actually that's the government making inequality worse. Okay. Market competition. Okay. Very low. 97% of people recognize this. And I think actually Japan, we have a huge advantage here in understanding that industries where you've got lots of firms competing tends to drive companies to be more dynamic. Whether it's the car industry, consumer electronics, so many of these fields. And when we talk about the history of the Japanese economy, that's one thing we will emphasize, that in fact, contrary to those images that the old, what they call MITI, now METI, Keizai Sangosho, used to be kind of steering the economy. The truth is the most dynamic sectors in Japan generally were so because of intense domestic competition in a large market. And then that competition gave firms the competitive advantage so they could go abroad and succeed. So they competed at home, they became better at what they were doing, they became very good at what they were doing, and then they were able to go abroad. Well, see, when governments start to reduce domestic competition to make what we often call a national champion, one big strong company to be able to compete at scale internationally, very often it doesn't work because the companies get lazy. It's just easier to stay home, make lots of money, having a monopoly position, and they don't actually innovate to do good things, to improve their products, to be able to sell internationally. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that. Okay, lots of common sense there. A bit wary about the drugs, but anyway, so we'll close that. Now, let's talk about market systems. I'm going to give my better camera one more go. Let's see how we go. I suspect it's dead. Oh no, it's working. Yay, let's go back to that. Right. So we'll go now into screen share. Oh, before I show you the slides, I will go in and show the website and where the download is. Oops, there goes the video again. This is driving me crazy. Look, no, I won't, because it's rather than having to restart something. There is a link on Moodle directly to the download for the market system article, and we'll go from there. Okay. So modern market systems, I'm running this off the PDFs just as they download from Moodle because I have had some problems with Keynote, which I tend to work in. Doesn't seem to work as well doing the desk share. Right, so the first chapter, the supplementary reading by Charles Lindblom, who's a very famous political scientist who really spent his whole career thinking about the relationship between economies and businesses, the state. And this is a superb book. It's one of the last things he's did his career. He's well retired now. And I published under Yale University Press. And it's very nice because it's an overarching view of market economies, so capitalism in a sense. One of the problems I think in terms of understanding how our business economic environments work is that when we study economics, it's a little bit different in high school. But if you jump into economics at university, uh, typically it's broken into macro and micro. And typically the starting point is kind of theoretical. So you jump off straight away into assumptions of things like perfect competition and supply and demand curves and whatnot. And so many of you will have done this. All of that is fine, but in a sense, what they're doing is they're starting with these highly abstract models of the workings of an economy with a whole lot of assumptions, and then they gradually relax those assumptions, and very much through a mathematical prism. Now, of course, anyone who is allergic to maths in the first place, even the sight of a graph, immediately is kind of terrified and stops listening. Many other people who can follow the logic nonetheless find themselves working from rather abstract models. So what this book does is it kind of fills the gap between those typically more qualitative, descriptive accounts of how political systems work, which so many political scientists write, and what economists do, which tends to be more abstract, more theoretical, and often more mathematical in terms of the way it communicates the logic of systems. And in a sense, in one compact book, it explains the logic of market systems and why they have become so predominant the world over. But it also provides a basis for understanding that no two market systems are the same, and neither does any particular market system stay the same over time, that there are a whole lot of changes that are happening, technological impacts, the political process, and so many other things. So first of all, to talk about companies. Now, some of you are already familiar with this. Those of you who've taken my Introduction to Business course already know about this basic framework, Lindblom. Indeed, some of you will have looked at this reading because this reading was available even for the first year students. Okay, so if you've already done it, great. I really see this as a capstone. We've got the introductory course, you've got the advanced course, and you can put anything you want in that big sandwich in between in your SILS curriculum. A key thing, because our book is about the company, about firms in their societal context, okay, I'm leading with Charles Lindblom's description of firms. And he describes firms as islands of command coordination in a sea of market mutual adjustment. This notion of mutual adjustment is critical to what Lindblom describes with market systems. And for it to be meaningful, let's just think about it. You know, if you go to the flower market, for example, if you're a florist and you are serious about getting very good flowers to sell in your florist shop, then the best thing to do is to get up early in the morning, go to one of, I think, 4 different flower markets in Tokyo, 3 major ones and 1 smaller one. And there are wholesalers there who are buying the flowers from flower growers all over Japan. Okay, so you get up in the morning, you go there and you check out the stock. You see the prices they're offering per flower or per dozen or whatever the pricing basis is. Okay, dozen in the old Anglo tradition, like a dozen eggs. And then you kind of mutually adjust. So the seller offers a certain price for a certain volume. Maybe explicitly you will ask for a discount or ask for a few more. Or maybe, and more often the case, I think in a Japanese context, your body language will be enough. You'll just go, and then the seller will sense your hesitant reaction, probably come back with a lower bid, offer maybe omake, something to throw in to seal the deal. Okay, so this notion of kind of mutual adjustment. And human beings are extraordinarily good at this. Now, we tend to have descriptions of dealing with other people, dealing with strangers, that are rather more pessimistic than the reality of our lived experience. And the reason for this is the negative experiences when we run up against people who are stubborn, uncooperative, asocial, unsocial, aggressive, Ganko Ayaji types or Hinjin or whatever. They are very strong impressions for us. So we tend to remember the very negative experiences rather than the large numbers of day-to-day, so subtle you hardly even notice it kind of mutual adjustment moments that are happening. Just think of Shinjuku Station in the morning. More people pass through Shinjuku Station than the entire population of New Zealand every single morning. But how many people actually bump into each other? Remarkably few. This ability that we intuit other people, we kind of read their body language and whatnot, and we can subtly mutually adjust. There are some people who can't. And those people generally annoy other people. Sometimes they mean no harm. It's just the way they're hardwired. Sometimes they are truly selfish idiots. Of course, the Keitai zombie, the people walking around with the phones, completely oblivious, are more and more and more. And arguably, there are more people in their own world, my world, than in the past, which diminishes your capacity for mutual adjustment. Indeed, when I zoomed down to get the Shuden, the last train from Waseda Station last night, I walked down the stairs and there was this really dopey dude walking up the stairs, looking at his phone, looking at a game, and we came face to face. And he didn't even see there was a human being in front of him, and I had to step right around him. Needless to say, I thought he was a word that starts with A and finishes with E, but I'm not going to say here. But just a dopey dude in his own world. Most of the time, we're capable of subtle mutual adjustment. And so actually, there's lots of almost unconscious cooperation that characterizes societies. And this means that we have extraordinarily effective coordination mechanisms. One of the key things that leads to many economists and indeed anthropologists to argue for less top-down command or control is they say that most adjustments, most coordination is actually best done on the ground, at the ground level, like Gemba, okay? Where people actually are, they can interact with each other. And so the ideal kind of thing is to give incentives or messages to people to act in the ways you want them to act, but don't get too prescriptive. Don't write very strict rules. Now, actually, Corona, COVID pandemic, presents some interesting examples of where we can see this. And one of the things I want to say in a very, very positive way about Japan, and it's a little bit contrary to some of the foreign images of Japan, but that Japan actually has a very high level of trust in, preference for people level coordination rather than top level command. Now that seems surprising because most people have this image of Japan as having a very strong state and bureaucrats passing lots of ridiculous rules and everything. And there are elements of that. But Corona shows very clearly that actually many countries that pride themselves on their liberalism have also very strong tendencies towards top-down command. And when we will go back to this definition of the company in a moment, but I want to explain this first of all, the coordination, and then we'll see the command in the firm sense. And I want to use the example of masks, and the state of Victoria in Australia is one, but we see quite a number of countries where, first of all, masks weren't considered necessary. And indeed, even the chief health officers were saying, you don't need a mask, it doesn't make a difference. Don't run out and buy masks, leave them for the medical professionals. Right away, that was really confused messaging. Leave them for the doctors, you don't need them. Well, in a pandemic, if the chief medical officer says the doctors need the masks, you don't, the clear lesson is actually, you probably do need it, okay? Or it would be a good thing to have. So it was confused messaging which undermined respect for the experts in the beginning. Um, what we see is when later on everyone did accept that masks can help to reduce infections, and the reason why the officials publicly accepted it was because masks became more available, which is terribly cynical. Okay, so the market for masks drove statements about scientific truth in relation to risk, which is very irresponsible. Then what happened is we see places like the government in Victoria and many other places requiring masks. Now, still today in Victoria, although I think there was only 4 or 5 corona cases in total yesterday, it is a $200 fine to go outside your house without wearing a mask. So, if you're in a park and there is no one around you for hundreds of meters, you're in the country and you're fishing by yourself with nothing but you and the river or the ocean and the big blue sky and a fishing rod, you are still legally required to wear a mask. Now, for most Japanese, that would be absolutely ridiculous. Now, I know some people might think maybe we should have a mask requirement to ride public transport. Many countries have done this, that you're legally required to wear a mask in public transport, okay? And there's a penalty if you don't. But even in Japan, where the density of the population is so high, and you would think particularly vulnerable, Japan has not gone down the path of command. And one of the interesting things we find out is that legally, under the Japanese constitution, it's actually extraordinarily difficult for governments to require people to stay home. So trying to nudge people or encourage people to more cooperative, responsible behavior rather than commanding it seems to have been quite effective. And one of the interesting things we're going to see over time is a reflection on what COVID-19 shows about our societies. And it smashes some of the stereotypes, for example, that Northeast Asian countries all tend to be more authoritarian, top-down, command-based. Now, I have made these points, in a few virtual international conferences around corona and whatnot, political science, European Association, European ECPR, European Consortium of Political Research, for example. And some of the Europeans said, oh, that's because, people are kind of trained in authoritarian ways. They've internalized the need to follow commands, even if they're not written in law. And I think, well, my older kids grow up in Japan and they don't do anything I ever tell them to do. So I'm a little bit skeptical about that. And we look around and we know that there are enough henjin who do completely ignore Joshki, okay? It does seem to be that there is some really interesting questions about actual voluntarism. When you leave people to cooperate, most people actually cooperate and cultures of cooperation arise. So we do see very interesting arguments for, if not deregulation, at least a certain faith in common sense. The very strict command approaches to corona in some European countries, even some states in the United States, some cities, certainly my country in Australia, is often predicated on the assumption that people will not do the right thing unless you threaten to punish them. That unless there are very strict penalties, people are selfish and irresponsible. Now, there are always some people who are like that, but it's a question of numbers. And so this raises some bigger issues too about what makes people act responsibly. When are people ethical, show an ethical regard for other people? I think one of the conclusions about the whole field of epidemiology, the study of the spread of disease and how to respond to it, is that most of the models of the epidemiologists were built on the assumption that a large proportion of population will not cooperate with voluntary measures and that they have to be forced by the state. And we see that there were quite surprising degrees of cooperation in early days. One of the interesting debates is were the very forceful command style lockdowns in early days so heavy that it broke culture of voluntarism, and that people then over enjoyed their freedom in the summer, and we have a second wave, in places like the UK. So anyway, let's go back again to this definition: islands of command coordination in a sea of market mutual adjustment. So what this is saying is effectively, inside companies, you have command and control structures. You have chain of command, like the military. You have Butcho, Kacho, okay? You have division chiefs, you have section chiefs, you have team leaders and whatnot, chains of responsibility, which are important. Effectively, the notion is you have strong top-down direction. So we see companies, particularly with a strong culture of the powerful leader, and that's very much a norm in particularly Anglo-American businesses. The expectation that the leader will be of very high quality and provide the steering, the direction, and then the commands will flow down the chain, and therefore companies can respond quite speedily in response to, say, changes of strategic direction. And there's so much conversation around that, the advantages and the disadvantages. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to coordination market systems in general. So we can say that market systems are actually remarkably effective at coordination, all manner of what Lindblom calls performances. Constant mutual adjustment between buyers and sellers. And if anyone's involved, done day trading or even just looked at stock market prices, you can see this as number of buyers and sellers change and prices shift. Okay, you constantly see this data-wise in real time adjustment. And people, consumers adjust expectations. You go to the market, to the store, expecting to pay a certain price for something that maybe something you haven't bought for years, and you suddenly discover that it's either on average got a lot cheaper or a lot more expensive. Then you have to rethink, do I want it at this price if it's become more expensive? And we're actually pretty good at adjusting ourselves to new expectations in relation to price. But short term, we tend to anchor or fix psychologically on the price we're familiar with. And actually, there's a lot of interesting work on the psychology of investor behavior and the danger of what we call anchoring. So people tend to make decisions about whether they should buy or sell shares based on the price they paid for some shares the first time they bought shares. So you buy shares in Toyota, and then the shares go down 20%, and you think, wow, they're cheap, because you previously bought them at a certain price. But in fact, the new price should, if markets are working very well, reflect updated information about the prospects of that business. So always be aware of where you're getting your notion of whether something is cheap or expensive. Okay, is it just an internalized thing based on the randomness of when you first took an interest in the price for that asset? Or is it about looking at the fundamentals? And do you think the market has mispriced that asset? So we'll come back to that. One of the problems with coordination versus command is we don't pay much attention to coordination because it actually happens with large numbers of anonymous people. History writing and, of course, journalism focuses on the leadership, the command, and the control. No surprise, the PR department does what the CEO says. So the CEO is going to be telling stories about the direction of the company. The CEO is as much focused about marketing themselves subsequently in the market for corporate control. And as a consequence, we often get this sense that really what happens in a company or in an economy is to a significant degree function of the people who can claim credit, even if they really don't deserve the credit for it. Generally, politicians like to claim credit for an economy when it goes well, and they like to blame the markets when it goes poorly. There's a huge amount of good psychology on this, by the way. Attribution effects. People watching their favorite football team, for example, their baseball team. If the team wins, people tend to say, oh, we did so well. We scored a goal, okay, at just the right moment. If the team loses, they say they lost the game. So we tend to put psychological distance between ourselves and whoever we were supporting when they do poorly, and to connect with them psychologically when they do well. So it's no surprise that all of the good stories that we hear about business tend to be in terms of the role of leaders and strategy. And all of the problems tend to be blamed on either markets or poor execution, which means everyone else below who has to do what the boss tells them to do. Okay. Attentions to systems of mutual adjustment and efficiency are discussed in a range of scientific and academic inquiry, and some of this is kind of summarized in the discussion of market systems. So some of this stuff is direct from, a few of these slides are direct actually from Introduction to Business. So some of you will have actually remember these, but I put them there directly because they are straight from Lindblom. Key points. There is much more cooperation than competition in a market system. There is a global market system despite there being no global government. That is not a trivial point. When we talk tomorrow about the expansion of business across distance, we'll see that actually the integration of economies happened without a global government. It was sometimes easier within an empire when it was under, say, one king or emperor or whatever, but very often the case there wasn't. So much of our global trade, our prosperity happens despite the fact that there is no global government. That gives us big hints domestically as well. No government has ever achieved similar feats of coordination. Planned economies have never got, under the old Soviet system, for example, never came close to what we've achieved with market systems. Very significantly, there's a large diffusion of participation and control. Because it's bottom up, no one controls the system, and that's kind of the point, okay? You can make much better use of ideas and insights. One of the really basic principles we find in writing contracts in industries where there is a lot of uncertainty about whether a product will succeed or not when it's put in the market is to give what we call decision rights to the people who are closest to the information. So in Hollywood, for example, generally in the creative industries, there are practices of contracting and decision rights in those contracts that at every point allow people to stop a project. So in making a movie, for example, money is spent at certain stages. As the project is developing, there are certain points where the people who are next to put money in and have the most recent information about the standard of how the project is going get to decide, will we spend the money or not? Hence the effect of straight to video or straight to cable. There are a lot of movies that actually cost more to market than to produce. For many movies, in fact, there is more money spent on advertising, promoting the movie than actually making the movie. But at a critical point, the studios, for example, who normally have an investment stake, they look at it and they say, despite some famous actors and an interesting story, it just doesn't really work, does it? These people didn't come together. It hasn't gone well. This is going to be a flop, okay? In Hollywood, they call it a 10-ton turkey. A turkey and a really big turkey, a 10-ton turkey. So let's just put it straight to cable and not spend any money on advertising it, okay? So at that point, where the next amount of money is to be spent when there's more information available at hand. In contrast, the pure command model says, make this movie, release it on this date, and everyone does that regardless of the clear evidence that it's becoming an emerging failure. So we see some of the incredible dynamism of the US economy is the speediness of decision. The ability to cut losses, to say, no, this isn't going to work out. Yeah, we've spent $50 million on this, but even if we put another $10 million into it now, we're not even going to make the $10 million back. Therefore, let's kill it. Okay. So the American capitalism is very good, despite seemingly top-down command and control, of actually having those decision points. And a lot of it is to do with the way people are hired and fired, and their performance criteria. So it's not just about doing what you're told, decided by the boss months ago. It's really about, if I make this decision to spend this money, will there be a return directly on my decision that I am responsible for? Now, in command systems, there are many more veto points. And as I've just said in this case, the veto point can be good if it's tied towards performance. Very often, the veto point is just frustrating what people want to do. I remember when I was a PhD student at Australian National University, a good friend, an Indonesian student who was studying with me, and he said, one of the key things you need to understand in Indonesia was that although the president's the big man and everyone shows great respect to the president, you know, if the president rings up a governor of another province and says, this is what we're going to do, the governor says, yes, 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 president, absolutely, puts down the phone and goes, no, don't think we'll do that. Okay, so very considerable veto points. Waseda is kind of like that. Okay, so although you get strong decisions from on high that the media reports, Waseda actually should be, to my mind, be called the Federated States of Waseda, because each faculty has a very considerable degree of discretion. Okay, so we often need to keep up appearances, but there's a lot of ichio katachi dake de kind of going along with some strategy and doing our own thing. Unless you wonder about this, ask about where's a quarter system in SILS. Okay. So managing conflict, one of the really valuable aspects of market systems is it's a way of keeping people busy and less likely to be anti-social. Okay. Having people working in boring jobs and whatnot has people somewhat dissatisfied. Having people not working at all has them very dissatisfied and with time on their hands. So we know, for example, the simplest way to solve urban crime is to have urban economic renewal. So if there are jobs for people to have, people have aspirations, and they're less likely to go around and smash things because they're bored. Okay, very simple. Market systems provide a simple decision rule. This is a key notion that Lindblom emphasizes. It is a quid pro quo, a Latin. This is, it's a conditionality. Do this in return for that. Another good joken. Okay. So the quid pro quo in the market system, the condition is you can have what you want up to the value of what other people will pay you for what you have or you can do. Very simple. You want a new surfboard? Okay. So you don't have any money. So are you going to get an old bust up surfboard, or are you going to get that real dream surfboard you want? Really depends on whether you can get some money. So it depends on what other people are prepared to pay you for what you can do or what you can have. Maybe just you decide that you don't need that motorbike anymore. So you sell your motorbike, you get some cash, and in return, you buy the surfboard that you really want. Alternatively, maybe you're really, really good as a tutor of English, as a home tutor, and you can get lots of students' parents who want to pay you lots of money to help their lazy kids study to get into SILS. Okay, and then you can go and buy the surfboard you want. Now, of course, you're immediately thinking, but hang on, there's a bunch of rich kids, and they got a family card, and they can just charge the surfboard to dad's credit card. Absolutely. And that's the problem with quid pro quo, and we'll come back to that in a moment, because there is this big distributional issue. However, the implication is that in a society where it's relatively easy to start a business, to get to get rich, it provides a mechanism for people to direct their energies to chase the good life. If you want to live in that really nice suburb, say in the Australian case, you want that mansion by the harbour, well, go and have a startup that might make you a multi-millionaire. And in a way, the payoff is much more likely than starting a revolution. Okay. People who start revolutions tend to do so out of the belief that they've got absolutely nothing to lose. We'll talk about the sources of political instability, by the way. Generally, poor people don't start revolutions. People whose expectations that they were going to be better off, lower middle classes moving up, when those expectations are smashed and they see no hope, they tend to start revolutions. So it's actually economic reversals that tend to bring revolutions rather than just economic underperformance. So the key implication of market systems, it provides an incentive for creativity and sociability, that if you are nice to people, you make a good impression on people, they are more likely to want to employ you to do things, to work with you, to maybe to create a business, for example. Now, what is the chosen domain of the market? This is another key thing from Lindblom, okay? You said you don't like slavery. Most of you said you don't like selling drugs to children. Now, there are clearly some markets we don't accept. Once upon a time, it was acceptable to use force, to go and grab people from their homes, to put them in chains and to sell them to other people as slaves. That is universally considered to be absolutely appalling these days, although slavery still happens in some dark places of the world. Similarly, selling drugs to children. We have very strict sense of what kind of pharmaceuticals and chemicals can be sold to people, who can sell them, the approval processes, and we're going to see this with obviously a potential vaccine for COVID-19 as well. So the domain of markets is completely free markets, ethically unacceptable to modern people. So there is no such thing as completely free markets anywhere. Every market is regulated to more or less degree. Generally, we allow objects and performances to be bought and sold, if, and this sounds a little bit obscure, but subject to contingent human control. That is, all that simply says is that humans can control it. They can put conditions on it. That we can control the quality of what we're selling. That, if it's something that we cannot credibly control to deliver, we can't write a contract for it. Much as you might like to pay 1,000 yen, maybe 100,000 yen, for blue skies on your wedding day, nobody can contract to provide that for you. Okay. Now, in the past, some very dodgy religious types would do that. You go to the shaman or something and you pay some money and bring an offering, and they promise to make it rain to save your crops. Then it didn't. They had a funny story about how that was you because you didn't do the sacrifice properly or something. Okay. Another thing is things have to be scarce to actually be bought and sold. If they're not scarce, then you're not going to pay for them. It's just kind of obvious. And ideally obtained without compulsion. So this is the rule against slavery, the rule against theft and whatnot. Okay. Now, problems with the quid pro quo rule, we all understand, I think, creates incentives to work in innovation. Of course, ill fortune may handicap many people. Some people are incredibly unlucky in terms of their physical or mental well-being. And ultimately, it's good to say many societies have come to a recognition that we judge societies based on how they treat the less fortunate in their midst. That yes, it's nice if everyone can work and take responsibility for themselves, but there are some people who just physically can't. And so we need to look out for those folks. Also, many socially valued actions often go unrewarded. And if the only rule for a reward is a financial one, then we have some serious problems. And we see philosophers such as Michael Sandel, very famous guy Sandel, who says what money can't buy in a very famous book that he wrote a number of years back. And then the prior distributions problem. Current wealth is much influenced by the past, inheritance, and this is something we'll give more attention to. A little bit about efficiency. Efficiency simply is the ratio of valued outputs to valued inputs. If you've watched a really hopeless cook produce something which is sort of edible, but use a lot and waste a large amount of valuable inputs. You know how painful this is. This actually seems to be a common kind of netta on social media, YouTubers. My young son was watching Hikakin the other day, and his brother, popular YouTuber, do truly, to me, what was just like awful things in the kitchen. Just, you know, massive like squandering of good ingredients to make something which to me looked horribly inedible. One of the interesting things is how rarely do we actually have honest conversations about efficiency. You know, Harvard University, yeah, we recognize the graduates of Harvard are generally very bright and accomplished people. No surprise, to get into Harvard, it's extraordinarily difficult. So they're incredibly selective. So actually, how efficient is Harvard in actually educating people? This is a really painful conversation in relation to Waseda. You know, if Waseda is a very exclusive place, if there's lots of competition, we have a Baiditsu of like 8-1, you know, we only accept one for every 8 who apply, for example. Then is it no surprise that Waseda students on average tend to go on to have good careers? How efficient are we in actually making you even more productive, you know, educationally? And a lot of universities don't dare even ask themselves that question. Interestingly, less prestigious universities more often have to ask themselves this question. We get students who actually are not so academically accomplished when they come in. What can they do when they leave? There's more pressure on the less prestigious universities to think in those terms. This is a key notion from economics: decisions at the margin, marginal benefits versus cost. Okay, it's an extension of what I said before about bring decisions close to the most recent information. At the point of marginal benefit or marginal cost is most efficient. So the junior administrative person doing paperwork, for example, has a much better sense of how a process should be designed to make it efficient than someone senior, okay? Because they're the one who has to invest the effort in the first place. So Lindblom says when markets are working well, prices correspond to the frequency and intensity of desires. What that means is simply when fewer people want something or want it strongly, prices should fall, okay? Supply and demand, that's a nice way of saying that, okay? So efficiency prices should change as people change their minds about value. And what we find in market systems, very, very much so. This is why auction systems work quite well. What we see the price of masks bought online falling quite dramatically because effectively people were making judgments about, you know, supply and demand, and their preferences shifted towards certain better designed masks rather than others, maybe made in Japan, acquired a certain premium relative to others over time. And so prices shift in response to consumers' perceptions, okay? Economists talk about efficiency prices for this reason. Prices make cost information universally available. What does this mean? Simply put, longer term, businesses will not keep selling a product for a lower price than the cost of making it, okay? Short term, they need the cash, they may have excess stock, and they're always a bargain. That's a great deal if you're lucky enough to get one. Longer term, people won't keep doing businesses that just lose money really long term, okay? And what this means is they force cost information on every chooser. If you really want this functionality, this is what it's going to cost you, okay? Also, there's this notion of motivational efficiency, that if the prices work well, entrepreneurs are going to direct their energies to the areas of the greatest return. Now, a little bit about states and markets, because we're talking about private governance and public governance context, okay? Democracies have market systems. It's really striking. You can't find a democracy that doesn't have a market system. But the reverse causality is not assured, okay? Market systems need not always lead to democracy. There was a time in the early 1990s where a lot of people wanted to believe that, and particularly they wanted to believe that about China, for example. But it's very clear cut now that you can have market systems that don't lead to full democracy. And this realization is having a huge impact, and just recently having a huge impact in thinking about how the world evolves, particularly with China as on track to eventually be the largest economy in the world. And so, well, we'll have effectively a market-based system, largely market-based system, that is not a democratic actor. Now, we can think in terms of consumer behavior as kind of market voting. You know, you buy one brand rather than another brand, you're voting for one brand rather than another brand, okay? Whereas political voting, the difference though is you're picking a very specific product at a particular time. So it's highly specific, you know exactly what you're getting. You can hold the product in your hand, you know, you got the watch, okay, and I'm conscious of the time. Versus political voting is about intentions. You know, you vote for a political party with the hope that they'll kind of do what they say they're doing over the next 3 years or 4 years or whatever. So it's only periodic, which actually means that market voting is much closer to the contemporary information. But on the other hand, public governance is extraordinarily complicated. So this is why we have this, you know, periodic representative democracy model. So effectively, when you have more market-based decisions, you can make elites more accountable because consumers can simply vote with their wallet. They can stop paying for products from companies. I mean, I woke up this morning to the news that McAfee, the guy who founded the McAfee virus software company, has just been arrested. And started to read about the reasons why he was arrested. And I suddenly thought, oh, I'm not so sure I feel so comfortable about actually buying his software now, which reinforces a message that other people told me that there are better antiviral software anyway. So, you know, we see this. Consumer boycotts of companies are becoming very powerful mechanism, particularly in an era of social media. Very significantly, powerful market elites will be political actors as well. They'll donate to politicians. They may even become politicians to pursue their business interests or to favor people like them, Donald Trump. Okay. Now, I want to turn into exit voice and loyalty. I'm not going to rush through this, so I'll carry over a bit of it to tomorrow, but I want to cover the basics. Give me a quick. Exit voice and loyalty is associated with a remarkable scholar. And it's ultimately a theory of reactions to decline. And it's very useful for understanding market systems, but also political systems. And it applies to all aspects of society. Anthropologists, sociologists use this framework as well too. We can think of it in terms of our personal relationships and members of our, you know, the clubs we're members of, our sakuru and things like that. So the economist Albert Hirschman, very interesting character. Those who take an introduction to business, you know, I've spoken about him. There's a link on the website, a very interesting presentation by a Princeton professor who was his colleague, who's written a biography of Hirschman, tells his story. In short, he was a young German Jew from an affluent, very intellectual family. He was a brilliant student. He fled Germany with the rise of the Nazis. He went to Paris. He was doing a doctorate there. He went to fight in the Spanish Civil War. He then helped German and other intellectuals escape Nazi Germany. His Italian wife's brother was murdered in prison by the Mussolini fascist regime. Hirschman ended up getting to America. He joined the US Army. He was an interpreter, actually, in war crimes tribunals and whatnot. And you can see a picture of him in Wikipedia standing next to a doctor certifying the corpse of a leading Nazi officer who was shot dead for war crimes. Okay, he was very focused because of his experience on when you stay in your own country, when you exercise voice, when you protest at the direction society is going, or when you say, "Yutimo no iminai," So he really understood the exit option, but he also tried to make sense of the loyalty option. Why did so many Germans neither oppose the Nazis nor leave Germany? Many did out of fear for themselves. Some left out of principle. And he long toyed with those ideas. Then he became an economic historian, and he was at Princeton. He quit Princeton, actually, and he went to work doing UN development projects in Latin America. Eventually went back to Princeton, was a professor there. So he saw that this applied in all aspects of life. It's whether people stayed in their village and they worked in a company, even when they left their society or not. And the question he was interested in is, how do stakeholders, people who benefit from an organization, for example, react to decline in the performance of firms, organizations, states, or other individuals? So examples. Do you exit the relationship? Do you sell the stock, quit the club, buy another firm's product, change boyfriends? Okay. You fall in love, the guy's romantic, he brings you flowers, he shaves, he showers. After a while, he just wants to just sit on the sofa, watch Netflix, get Uber Eats, pizzas, and, just he's in his track decks, and it's just like, following that old Japanese adage, you don't need to bait a fish that you've already caught. And then what do? Do you just like, oh, well, this is love. Do you put up with it? Do you give him a hard time, tell him get his act together, I'm going to leave you? Okay. That's voice, look at yourself, you're a disaster. Or do you, put Tinder on your phone and you start to look at, alternatives to diminish maybe the cost of exit? Or do you just simply say, I'm out of here, and even when I've got no alternative to go to? Okay. So do you show loyalty despite declining satisfaction? Do you voice complaint? Under what conditions is each response more likely? Okay. I think some people resort to the chemicals I mentioned earlier. You can see graffiti all over New York. Some guy goes around writing, I am the beat of 1,000 purple butterflies. Okay. This is on Brooklyn Bridge. So, okay, if that works, if you just want to go to another place. I think throughout history, many women incapable of exercising voice or loyalty because of the precarious nature of their position mentally went to another place. Okay. And there is an ability to do that. I actually do think many Japanese are very good at mentally going to another place, when you're no, someone's just, you just go somewhere else mentally. Just go somewhere else mentally. Okay, so failing organizations, we really need to keep this in mind, because failing organizations, whether they're companies, whether they're NPOs, they're clubs, they're even states, are normal. This is a normal part of life. Problematic relationships are normal, okay? Okay, so people slacken off. History shows that public and private institutions go through periods of underperformance. Some fail, and others are reformed. The studies of marriage, the really interesting question is not that some marriages end up in periods of unhappiness. Duh. Almost all of them do. It's how you deal with it, okay? Which relationships are able to overcome the bad times and which ones break. Now, economics has historically focused on exit. The coffee's not as good as it used to be. You go to a different coffee shop, okay? You buy another product. So the market signals from investors selling shares or customers changing brands. This provokes reform, okay? The customers stop coming. The problem is you don't know why they stop coming, okay? Political science is historically focused on voice, protest, or electoral change that leads to improved performance. Major reason for this is, you don't migrate to another country every time the government does something you don't like. It has to be a pretty bad government before you even think of migrating, okay? So Hirschman is really focused on recuperation mechanisms to deal with what he called repairable lapses. Simply, it's a lot better to fix an organization rather than to build one from scratch. Anyone who, has broken up with someone and then sat in the bar night after night, lonely, thinking, is there no one out there who's good? Kind of knows sometimes it's better to work on the relationship rather than have a dummy spit and walk out. But I think we all know that kind of person. You try and have a bit of a conversation about the relationship. And to say in Japanese, you try and talk to them and go, ja, wakarioka. Yeah, some people go straight to the end game, right? So should we break up? Darling, could you, put the toothpaste, back on the shelf? So are we going to get divorced then? It's like, no, I don't think we're going to get divorced about the toothpaste, right? I think we're going to work through these issues. It doesn't make sense to constantly be breaking organizations and relationships. It's much better if we can learn to repair the lapses. And I'll finish up here, okay, and I'll pick up the last few slides tomorrow morning. To err is to be human. To not do anything about it is pathetic. That's my update of the old expression. This dummy was outside a clothing store. I saw, and some idiot smashed it in the face. And then I was amazed. Week after week, the staff, who clearly weren't worried about losing their jobs, just every morning put it back outside. And I thought maybe they thought it was kind of cool. But to my mind, it wasn't very clever branding positioning. Okay. So if something's broke and you can't be bothered fixing it, then that's pretty pathetic. And I'll just conclude with an observation that personality is a significant factor here. My own almost pathological instinct is to be a fixer. I just hate things that look needlessly crappy. I'm a little bit kind of OCD, I kind of admit on this. If you come to my office, you'll see everything's kind of neatly organized. It drives me crazy, for example, when I cross the street in Tokyo and I see huge weeds growing up. I want to stop and pull the weeds out. It's like, come on, okay. There are always some people who tend to be more the fixer type. There are other people who are a bit mindoksagaria and can't be bothered doing that. Organizations kind of need a mixture of people. And it's one of the interesting things we'll talk about. There's psychology does kick in, but there's also incentives. And that's part of the conversation we'll have. So we'll talk a little bit about recuperation mechanisms tomorrow. And in our main conversation will actually be about, since the historical origins of business. The slides are already up. And we'll start way back with the Roman Empire. And we'll have a very quick crash course. Okay. Right. Okay. So fine. Okay, I'm just sending one message there. Someone was having sound problems and whatnot. Remember, this will all be available as a video. You can look online. So thank you very much. And we'll have a live session tomorrow. Look forward to seeing you there. I'll hang around for a couple of minutes if everyone's got any questions they need to ask me, particularly the folks who just joined the new course. New to join the course. Thank you.